Welcome to the deep dive, everybody. Today, we're diving into some pretty murky waters, gotta say.
Murky is right.
We're talking politics, military respect, media representation, and at the heart of it all, a tragic story. The case of Army Specialist Vanessa Guillén.
It's a story that really captures a lot of the tensions and really difficult conversations happening right now.
Absolutely. And to help us unpack all this, I'm joined by, well, the expert. We always have to call in for these sorts of things.
Glad to be here. Always ready to go deep.
So let's start with the heart of the matter. Vanessa Guillén, young woman serving her country at Fort Hood, and tragically, she was murdered in 2020.
And her murder, as horrific as it was, it really became this flashpoint, this symbol of bigger issues within the military.
Right, because this wasn't just a random act of violence. This sparked a national outcry about sexual harassment in the military.
Exactly. People started asking, how could this happen? What kind of environment are we fostering where something like this is even possible? And that led to, calls for change, for accountability, which eventually, led to the I Am Vanessa Guillén Act.
Right, but for our listeners who might not be familiar, that act, it was specifically designed to try and protect service members, right? Like really address this issue of sexual assault and harassment within the ranks.
Yeah, it was a huge step, at least on paper, in terms of changing how these cases are handled within the military. It's about, changing the culture, the reporting process, everything.
And this is where things get really complicated because Vanessa's story becomes, well, it gets kind of pulled into the world of politics, specifically with former President Trump's involvement.
Right. And, this is where we have to tread carefully because there's a lot of emotion, a lot of differing opinions on this.
For sure. So what was Trump's involvement? What happened there?
So Trump met with Guillén's family after her murder, offering, condolences, support, the kind of things you'd expect. But a recent report from The Atlantic, and this is where things get really messy, alleges that Trump made some really concerning remarks during that meeting.
Concerning how so? Like, what are we
That's-
talking about here?
The Atlantic claims that Trump, and I quote, said, "It doesn't cost $60,000 to bury a fall Mexican." And he was apparently referring to the cost of Vanessa's funeral.
Wow. Okay, so obviously incredibly inflammatory language if true, and we absolutely have to acknowledge that. But I also imagine, given who we're talking about here, Trump denies ever saying this, right?
Oh, absolutely. He vehemently denies it. And to complicate matters even further, there are people who are reportedly at that meeting who back him up. They say he never said it.
So it becomes this classic he said, she said situation, but obviously the stakes are incredibly high here. And what makes this even more difficult to even wrap your head around is how Vanessa Guillén's family reacted to all of this.
Right, because you'd think with those kinds of allegations, they would be outraged, demanding answers. But that's not what happened, is it?
No, not at all. Vanessa's sister Mara, she publicly supported Trump. She even said she voted for him. And she's been very vocal in saying she felt like The Atlantic was exploiting her sister's death for political purposes.
It's heartbreaking all around, You have a family grieving an unimaginable loss, thrust into the center of this political firestorm. And it just highlights the deep divisions in our country, the ways in which even tragedy can be politicized.
That's a lot. And it kind of makes you wonder, how do we even begin to talk about these things? How do we have these conversations when there's so much information, so much emotion swirling around, and everyone seems to have an agenda?
It's definitely overwhelming, especially with such a sensitive and complex issue. Honestly, it made me think about the tools we have to navigate these kinds of information minefields. Like, have you ever heard of podcastworld.io?
You're actually reading my mind. I was just thinking that very thing.
Right.
Because it's so easy to get stuck in those echo chambers, just hearing one side of the story or getting bombarded with, frankly, questionable information.
Exactly. But with podcastworld.io, you can actually search through millions of podcast episodes for specific insights or perspectives. So, if you're interested in hearing directly from military families or experts on politics and media representation, you can find those voices.
Right. It's like having this incredible search engine for nuanced conversations. You can even chat with an AI bot trained on all these podcasts.
Yeah.
So you could theoretically get deeper insights from, experts like us, but on demand.
It's like a choose-your-own-adventure for understanding complex issues. I mean, imagine being able to ask experts on military affairs, ethics, and journalism, even, political commentators from across the spectrum, about this very case.
It's a game changer for sure. It's about empowering yourself to go beyond the headlines, to really dig into the nuances of a story like Vanessa's. And I think more than anything, that's what this case calls for, right? A deeper understanding of the complexities.
Absolutely. It's easy to get caught up in the he said, she said, the political back and forth. But at its core, this is a story about a young woman who deserves justice, a family shattered by loss, and a system that failed them.
It's a stark reminder that behind every headline, behind every political debate, there are real people, real lives, real pain. And we owe it to them to approach these conversations with empathy, with a commitment to seeking truth, and with a willingness to listen to all sides, even when it's difficult.
I couldn't have said it better myself. This isn't just a news cycle, it's a stark illustration of grief, respect, and accountability colliding on a national stage.
And as we always say here on The Deep Dive, it's not about coming up with all the answers. Sometimes it's about sitting with the questions, allowing ourselves to feel the weight of these complex issues, and then using that discomfort to motivate us, to learn more, to do better.
Couldn't agree more.
So for our listeners, we encourage you, go out there, learn more about Vanessa Guillén's legacy, read up on the I Am Vanessa Guillén Act, and maybe even use a tool like podcastworld.io to explore different perspectives on this case, on military families, on politics and media representation. Because the more informed we are, the better equipped we are to have these tough conversations and hopefully work towards a better, more just future.
Perfectly said.
And with that, another deep dive comes to a close. As always, thank you for joining us. Keep asking the tough questions and keep seeking out deeper understanding. We'll see you next time.